All right, how we doing? If you're tuning into this, you are here to learn about how to write a contract, essentially. Let's just call it real estate contracts 101. We're going to get into, pretty in depth here. I mean, this is, recording it obviously and meant to be a reference moving forward for really like the crash course that you're going to need to be able to understand contracts and also you know, how to do them essentially online and get them out. Pretty much everything these days is done via Authentisign or, an electronic signing system. If you know how to do that, then you'll also know how to do it, in person, the old fashioned way by printing and having your clients, signing and filling them in. So we got to hop right into it with that said. So we've got a listing right now on Swamp Road in Brockport that I'm going to work off of. And I'm using that listing for a couple of reasons. It's a unique property in that it's got, if looking at the MLS right now, it's got a septic system. It does have public water, so no well, but it also has oil-based heat. Which is, more unique than typically septic's common. But, if there's public sewers, you don't have to worry about a septic inspection addendum. And, most times there's natural gas as a source of heating fuel. So just a couple intricacies from there. That would be applied to a contract. So let's just, we're going to talk loosely about, this is a fake offer that I'm writing. So just to get through some examples, but we'll just go at this. I'm going to use an escalation clause. I'm going to show you differences between whether they're making an inspection contingency or not. I'm going to get into the septic addendum that applies and also, just show you what it looks like if there isn't one. So, going to hop right into it. So, basically by this time, how to get a listing pulled up on the MLS. So you're looking at it here. You're going to go to this icon here, transaction desk, and pull that up, and it'll move you to another screen. So you can still, refer back to the other MLS screen, but that's what you're going to want to be looking at this here. So now you're tasked with creating a new transaction. This is essentially allows you to create the contract, and then you can either print it or you can have the client sign it via Authentisign. You're going to go to ABT purchase contract packet. Our operations department will have one of these set up for you to where everything that you need essentially is going to be pre-filled and not pre, but available to you. So you don't have to go fumbling around and searching for everything. You are going to, so once you select that, it kind of fills in the rest. You're going to have, I'm going to go neither because that should be the way that it's filled out on your end to where things populate properly from there. So this is what you should be looking at so far. And actually I got Samantha right behind me, Sam. Yep. With the neither selection, do I not check the box for use wizard? That's a good one. We're stumped already. No problem. We'll get through it. I'm going to check it for now and we'll see what happens, what pops out here. So right now it's essentially developing everything that you need to do this. There's a few different ways to do this. Okay. You can use these, you see these steps 1 through 5. You can use these to fill in a lot of information. Like it has your purchase price, your deposit, other categories that you could fill in here and then would populate into the contract itself. Dates, is the next step. I don't do this personally. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. You can certainly take advantage of this feature. I've just, grown accustomed to not using it. So this is something you do want to use to make your life easier. The context section will show you, who's already on the contract. So the seller, and then it's one of our listings. So it has, Steve Popovich is the listing agent, and then Anthony as well as co-list. So I'm going to add, I'm taking an existing client of mine because I just searched for a pre-qualification letter to pull up, and they were the first ones that popped up. So I'm going to use Dennis and Lori Buttery here. So Dennis, you can only do one at a time. So what's important is you select their name, and then you make sure that they're a buyer. Okay. Because that, if it's not selected as buyer, then it won't populate to all the spots that's needed for them to be as a buyer. Okay. So very important there. Make sure that their email is correct. Their name reads correctly on the pre-qualification letter, which I'll pull that up now. And here we go. Dennis Buttery. So everything's spelled correctly. So now you save that, and he's going to be added as a buyer. Now, let's say you didn't have them already saved, which is, going to be common starting off. You would go new transaction, new transaction contact, and then you can do the same, buyer, Dennis Buttery. I'm just, I'm flying through it right now. So I'm not going to use this, and then, enter their email and save it. Okay. I'm not going to use that because I already have it, but that's how you would add somebody new. It's just that new transaction contact, or if you have contacts saved already, and add an existing contact. So I'm going to find Lori, the other buyer, Lori Buttery, and there we are. She's selected as buyer, saved, and we're good. Now I'm also going to add myself as the selling agent. Okay. Basically, buyer's agent equals selling agent. Okay. So that's that. So now we have all the parties to the contract that you need. We have the listing agent, we have yourself as the buyer's agent, and we have the buyers. Okay. So now next. So now these are all the forms that are available to us. Now, essentially what's going to happen is as soon as we click one of these and start filling it out, we'll be moved off of this screen or this step, and then I'll show you how to essentially get back to all the other forms that you need. But I would recommend starting with the bulk of the contract, which is the purchase and sale contract for residential property right here. Okay, and you pull that up, and here you are. This is the contract. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this, to get through things here. So, this is going to be the initial contract, and then all the addendums are added up to it. So I'm just going to go essentially line by line, step by step, and explain everything here. I think for each individual, training purpose wise, it's very important. Read this word by word. This is your life as a real estate agent, more or less, in terms of like this contract. You have to really know it inside and out. So before you get too deep into the weeds with this business, make sure you at least have a good understanding of what's going on with this contract. I'm not saying you got to be an attorney, because you don't, but ultimately you want to be pretty knowledgeable around, the contract that you're working off of with your clients. So that's important. So I'm going to, for training's sake and the efficiency of this session here, I'm going to kind of fly through it, but address a lot of it too. So, but again, read through it line by line. So, make sure that all the info is correct and it populated correctly, which it did. So the 2 is the seller. So, Dennis and Lori Buttery here are making an offer to the seller, Brian Henner. Okay. Now, down to the contract itself. So make sure the address is correct, 30 Swamp Road, Monroe County. This is something you have to fill in. And this is what you would get off of the MLS listing, knowing that we're in the town of Sweden. Okay. Sometimes it could be city of Rochester. This is not in the village of Brockport, but it may be in the village of Brockport if the property is located there. So knowing which one of these 3 items to check is the first step of things. So we're going to use town of Sweden, zip code, all this auto populates. So we don't generally have to worry about it. if we're setting up the contract process the right way, it would be tough to like know this number off the top of your head, and you don't even have to worry about going over to the listing and getting it from here. Okay. So it just auto populates. This is something that needs to be filled in as well. Approximate lot size. It does not auto populate. So we're going to go, back to the MLS listing. We see it's 1.83 acres. And we're going to add 1.83 acres. Easy enough. Description of buildings on the property. This is where, it's important to kind of be familiar with the property. I'm flying through it right now. Generally speaking, everything's going to be a single family residence. If it's a multi-unit residence, we'll want to state that. What I'm looking through these pictures for right now is to see if there's any other additional significant structures, like a barn or something else. That would really be it in terms of the something else, like a big pole barn. In that case, and there's not on this property, so I'm just going to go single family residence. If the property had a pole barn on it, or some other significant structure, I would add single family residence with pole barn or something to that effect. If it's just a normal standard detached garage or a shed on it, you don't really need to add that in this section. Okay. So moving on from that section, this is all complete now. Essentially, you're going to want to go line by line of this contract and make sure you haven't left anything incomplete that would need to be. So from here, other items included in the purchase. This section here, basically states that everything that's attached to the property is going to be included with the sale. So now, we're down to here. Other items to be included in the purchase and sale are most deals are going to have a mortgage tied to them. If you have a cash deal, then you could just write in refrigerator, stove, etc. Anything else that's included in terms of appliances or anything else, that comes with the sale. With a finance deal with a buyer that's getting a mortgage, we have to use what's called the personal property addendum. Okay. So, and I'm sorry, personal property agreement. So what I'm going to do here is, because this section here that's blank is asking other items to be included in the purchase and sale are, and I'm going to say, see personal property agreement. So this way, contractually, it's referring to this agreement. And then that way, that now becomes part of the contract. And I'll show you another spot where that, reflects to in a little bit. So that's important. I mean, to get real technical, anytime something is referred to as an actual part of the contract, you want to use capital letters, because if it were just all lowercase, then it's not technically referring to a tangible item of the contract, so to speak. So having this all capped is a good thing. Items excluded, this next section, this is where you're going to want to look to the private remarks and even the public remarks to see if, sometimes the seller will say, the washer and dryer is excluded, or a fire pit is excluded, whatever it is. So you're going to want to make sure that nothing is, stated to be, that the seller's taking it with them and it's not going to be included with the sale. And you'll get that here, and you also get it from the appliances. Appliances included here, they've got all the normal appliances: fridge, stove, washer, dryer, dishwasher, microwave. So it doesn't sound like anything's excluded here. So we're going to go just a simple NA. Okay, so that addresses the all the stuff included in the house. And again, this boilerplate section here is just basically addressing everything that's attached to the house is staying, and then this section addresses everything else that needs to be contractually included. This section here is so important and often not necessarily overlooked, but not really understood, I guess the way I would say it. Seller shall cause any heating, plumbing, air conditioning, electrical systems, including appliances, to be in working order at the time of closing, except for blank. So this is again what you would either want to be in touch with the listing agent on, not necessarily, but be in touch with the listing to know if they're disclosing something in their remarks, or that, for example, I don't know, I'm thinking of an example, because if a furnace isn't working, right, or plumbing isn't working, it's not going to pass financing. So you're not likely to be in this in this scenario at this point. But let's just say like the ice maker and the refrigerator is disclosed not to be working. Well, this would be where you want to put that. So except for ice maker on refrigerator. And that shows that you're a good agent and you know what, you're doing, and that, you're really into the nitty gritty details of, these contracts and how they want it. Because the seller, don't get me wrong, the seller's agent, the listing agent, and not in this case because it's us, but a listing agent could overlook this and not really protect their clients to where, they know that the ice maker isn't working, but, it's not addressed contractually. This, as soon as this box is checked, which this is a big part of this conversation, you have to check this box every single time, unless it's, some special deal where the buyer knows they're inheriting, a house that's not in good working order. So like a foreclosure or something like that, a distressed property where the power's not on, or we know the heat's not working, things of that nature, then this box should not be checked. And your buyer also needs to understand they don't have the contractual protection to know that, things are going to be solid and in good working order at the time of the final walkthrough and then closing. So in this scenario, I'm saying everything is going to be working except for the ice maker on the refrigerator. So I'm just going to leave that in there. This is all hypothetical offer anyway. But so important to understand this clause, how it works, and to never forget to check it unless it's, again, we're talking like 99% of the time it needs to be checked. Okay. All right. So moving on from there. Price, now we're getting into the good stuff. Okay. Price, deposit, concessions, contingencies are below here, but we'll start with this. So this house is listed at 159.9. I'm gonna talk about an escalation later, but I'm just gonna start at list price. Okay. So 159.9 is filled in. Generally speaking, you can do a personal check for a deposit, is fine. And let's just say it's a $10,000 deposit, $10,000 deposit there. If you have a buyer that is getting concessions, this is where it's addressed in the contract. And as an aside, when you're a listing agent, as you see, this is kind of just hidden almost, like it's not clearly stated. So like what happens is, say you're getting a buyer that's getting 3% seller concessions. You can either do 3% or you can do the actual amount. I'm not going to do the math right now, but say it wasn't 3%, you just needed $3,000 concession. Then you would check, do it that way. But let's just leave it. I'm going to leave it at 3%. Okay. If you're looking at this, it's not like it's fairly obvious that that 3% is in there like it is here with the list, the offer price and the deposit amount. Don't ask me why. You would think they would have, like another line below here to, to fill in the 3% concession. But if your representative buyer is getting the concession or needs them, this is where you address it. And when you have listings, make sure that you always check. Believe me, there's been errors made, and it's easy enough to do because this is so kind of like buried in the fine print. But you got to make sure that you read the contracts, because I'll tell you, for those that have had that error, you learn the hard way and you never had it again, because God forbid you get past an attorney approval and you didn't explain to your seller that there's 3% concession involved. Chances are that's coming out of your pocket. So that's how important it is to to read the contracts when you're presenting them, obviously. And in this case, 3%, that's your entire listing side of the commission. So now you're working for free. So be very careful. Next part, deposit. And there's, again, read everything, but just kind of explains here, proceeds they're delivered at closing to the seller. The deposit is we're going to get into it now. It's going to be held of whatever is filled in. Most times deposits are held by the listing brokerage, but that's filled in by the listing agent, generally speaking, in this section here. Okay. But there are some brokerages that have a seller's attorney hold it, or a seller may demand that their attorney holds it, and then they would have it would either be filled in appropriately, or you'd have to fill it in. Like if you got to the listing in this section where it said TBD or something, you'd want to find out from the listing agent what they want to do. Okay. So deposit in this case is going to be held by Keller Williams Realty, and it's deposited at LNB as Lions National Bank, which is the escrow lend bank that is used by our brokerage. So sometimes it's M&T, think different banks are used. But next section, seller concession. This just reads that if the concessions that you write in exceed what the bank will allow, then it's going to have to go off of what is actually allowed. And just because seller and buyer are agreeable to a $10,000 concession and the bank can only allow for 6, the deal's not going to close that. So there's got to be something that that takes into account to protect everybody. Transfer tax, recording costs, mortgage tax, etc. Basically, all this says the seller is going to be responsible for their end of the closing costs, and the buyer will be responsible for their end. There's 2 boxes that could be checked down here. Generally speaking, I hope you do have to deal with this box being checked, because it applies to $1 million or more purchase prices and who pays the transfer tax with that set. Generally speaking, under $1 million, it's an automatic. The seller pays the transfer tax, which is $4 per thousand of a sale price. So on $1 million property, that's a substantial amount of money. So that's something that they want, kind of negotiated up front, so it doesn't get to a disagreement at a closing table. So if you're selling $1 million properties, great. Just know that you have to check one of these boxes. Otherwise, price, at 160, you don't have to worry about that. Okay. Now, really to the meat and potatoes of the contract, okay, is the contingency section. All right. So the first one is, is the buyer getting financing or not? And typically we're dealing with mortgages, but if you have a cash buyer, you would want to use this box here and then provide the proof of funds with the offer. So today's October 21st. Just going to use that day because I'm attaching proof of funds if they were a cash buyer with the offer. Okay. We're going to, move off of that because we're going to, want to get financing addressed. So back to the buyer's pre-qualification letter. And this is an old pre-qualification letter. It's October. You would not want, as an agent, you would not want to use a buyer's pre-qualification letter dated 6 months ago or 4 months ago. So you'd want to make sure you have an updated letter within the last couple weeks, really, and even sooner if possible, because this bank doesn't provide an interest rate, but for the banks that do, if you have a letter dated today or yesterday, it's going to show the sellers and the seller's agent that, hey, we just ran the numbers, we're good with everything, we got our updated rate, and we're good to go, and not working with, info that's, 3 weeks old. Okay. But I'm looking at this letter to find a couple things. What type of loan product they have. And here we have a conventional mortgage. Okay. And then also what down payment they're doing. And this is, something that you're going to want to have a conversation with your buyer. Because just because in this event, they're using 124,000 divided by 155,000 is an 80% loan to value, meaning a 20% down payment. So just because this letter says that, you also want to verify that with the buyer, just to say, hey, you're doing 20% down payment like your pre-approval letter says, right? Typically, they're going to say yes. If they said, no, I was only planning on doing 5%, you're going to want to get an updated letter, because you're not going to want to present an offer with a 20% down payment, when the buyer's doing 5%, because it's going to raise questions. So back to the mortgage. So first, bouncing around here. So we're not doing cash. We need a contingency for financing. So it's a mortgage commitment contingency. As a buyer, you've been pre-qualified, but you're subject to obtaining an actual mortgage commitment. Okay. And, here we're going to start filling in these blanks essentially. This buyer is getting a conventional mortgage loan. If it were FHA, you would just put FHA or VA, whatever loan product they have. But we're going conventional loan commitment in an amount not to exceed blank percentage of the purchase price. So they're doing 20% down, and the loan is not to exceed 80% of the purchase price. Okay. Generally speaking, we always use these percentages and not, the or section here, which would be, the loan amount that they're using. So just when you use this, you have to choose either one of these with the or. So if you use this, you don't have to worry about this. And generally speaking, use the percentage category. So moving on, at an interest rate not to exceed blank. This is what we need to fill in. So essentially it's the concept in play is that you're going to want to, show the seller that you're not just down to the, 10th of a point of, essentially the buyer, say, let's just say, use the rates today. I mean, right now the rates are creeping towards 7.5%. So in this event, this has to be a conversation with your buyers too, by the way, to let them know how you suggest structuring the contract. Let's just say today they have a rate quoted from their bank of 7.5%. You're going to want to provide a buffer so that if, they go to lock in their rate tomorrow and the rates jump a little bit to 7.65%, technically the buyer could say, no, I'm only contractually obligated to agree to 7.5% or lower, and therefore I'm not going to buy the house. So there's an element of play of you want to show the seller that, hey, we're allowing for wiggle room for if rates increase, that we're still locked in contractually. But there's an element of play here of like protecting yourself as an agent in the deal so that things aren't just down to the penny with a buyer. Now, that's a conversation you have to have with the buyer. You don't want to explain it like I just did, that, hey, I need to protect myself so I can get paid, right? But you just want to explain to them, hey, right now you're looking at 7.5%. Let's stick to that. Or let's hope that we can get that, but rates are volatile depending on how long it takes you to lock in a rate. It could be 7.75 come next week. So we got to provide that buffer for a seller to take us seriously is essentially the conversation. So they may say, okay, what buffer do you want? And you may say, let's do 8%. They may say, I really don't want to buy this house if I'm at 8%. And then you're kind of almost negotiating with your buyer at that point, which is fine. But let's, say you come to an agreement of 7.75%. Okay. So they're at 7.5. The rate can go up to 7.75 and they're still contractually locked in. Again, you have to have this conversation with the buyer. If you don't, I mean, frankly, what happens with these contracts, believe it or not, but like buyers don't even read them. So they're just flying through and signing them and trusting you. And if you put in here something that wasn't discussed of a higher rate, and then they have to lock in at that higher rate, and they're thinking, well, no, I was only going to buy this house if I was at 7.5%, which is what I was quoted, and you have it in here contractually at 8%, I mean, you're liable. they're going to be ticked off if they're not agreeable to it at that point. So it's so important to have, find a way to educate your buyers on what is going on contractually. Because again, you got to keep in mind, most people aren't even reading these contracts. They're just, playing the video game of, Authentisign or DocuSign and pushing the button and inserting their signature until it tells them that they're done, and then they're good. They trust you, as they should. So make sure that that trust is there and you're not trying to, essentially do anything that could, lead to them thinking you duped them. Okay. Term of typically most buyers are going to do 30 years, but if they're doing a 15-year mortgage, great. Buyers shall apply for this loan and have until, so this is how long is it going to take to get the loan commitment? So you want to use about 30 days, but get with the lender. If they say, hey, everything's good, they've already got us everything, we can turn this around in 20 days, fine. But the reality is a mortgage commitment is filled once the bank approves the loan and also the appraisal is done and passes. So the bank may be able to approve their side of things very quickly, but oftentimes the appraisal is what's going to be the hang up. So general rule of thumb is 30 days or less. You also don't really want to be too much over that. So I'll be a little aggressive here. It's October 21st now. I'm going to use November 18th. Just about 30 days for them to get their commitment. Okay. This language goes on to say that, essentially it's a contingency and the buyer's protected to where if they don't get approved for their loan, then the deal's dead essentially. So that's how this contingency works. So right now they've been pre-qualified, doesn't mean that the loan's going to be fully approved. And that's why they have till November 18th in this scenario to actually get that done. Next blank to fill in is going to be in regards to any repairs required by the appraisal, meaning the appraiser went to the property and said, hey, in order for me to pass this property for financing, you need to have a new roof put on. Extreme example, right? But let's just say there's something that comes up that the buyer or the seller, buyer and seller essentially have to figure out how to get the property to pass the appraisal standards for the bank to fund the loan. This blank to fill in here reflects how much the seller is going to be contractually on the hook for to have to, automatically agree to taking on in terms of, okay, house didn't pass appraisal and, there's $500 worth of work needed. Whatever you put in this category is what the seller is going to be on the hook for. So let's just say it's $250. Now, in the market that we're coming out of right now, the more aggressive offer, the better, to where, you would typically just use zero for this category here. Meaning, if it doesn't appraise, we're not telling the seller they have to do anything contractually. At that point, the deal could die if it can't be figured out, or, both parties are essentially renegotiating. The seller could tell the buyer, pound salt, if you want this to close and there's $500 worth of repair, however we're going to structure it, but you're footing the bill for that. Or hopefully reasonable parties kind of prevail and we'll split it, or a seller says, okay, no big deal, I want this to keep going, I'll get it done. But, generally speaking, the amounts to use here to have a reasonable approach, and this is back to like the market 5 years ago where you'd always have something in this box, no more than 1,000. Okay. Because if you have like $10,000 on there, like that's a big amount. That's saying the seller's on the hook for $10,000 worth of work if needed. Now, generally speaking, what, is going to get flagged by an appraiser. So if there's something that big, it's kind of like, all right, well, we need to figure out what the agreement's going to be ahead of time versus just, throwing something at a wall and hoping that it sticks. But, so no more than 1,000, 250 is super reasonable. 500 is generally reasonable. So those types of amounts in play. So I'm going to say 250, meaning the seller's on the hook for up to $250 of repairs if needed from the appraisal. If there's $251 of repairs, we got a problem that we got to figure out. Okay. Moving on. That's the mortgage commitment. That's going to be a common thing that we have to have filled in unless you're doing cash, and important to understand the ins and outs of that. Other contingencies. Sale and transfer of title would be essentially the seller is contingent on selling their home, or I'm sorry, the buyer is contingent on purchasing this home from the seller. The buyer's contingent on their sale of their home that they own now, meaning they can't buy a home without selling this home. So I'm gonna run through a full example. I'm gonna make it contingent on a sale. Okay. I'm gonna make it contingent on an inspection as well. And I'll show you the alternatives, but let's just work with an inspection contingency. Okay. This section here, building code compliance, I don't really like it as a listing agent, because the way that this reads is basically the buyer can get with the town or whoever or demand to know like what permits are currently on file. And, the way this reads is they've got 10 days to do that. And then determine if they're happy with it or not. And, decide if they want to buy the house or not at that point. So as a listing agent, it's a minor type of aspect. And don't get me wrong, there's certain properties or certain situations where like you're going to want to have verification that things are on file. But, most times it's just, part of the title work process that the attorneys do is to make sure that like there's no major issues with the property, whether it's, something to do with the survey that could come up that would require a permit, like a fence, or something otherwise. But at least in the market that we're in now, as a buyer, you don't have the leverage to say, well, I want this, and this to be 100%. It's just kind of like these, and this sounds bad what I'm about to say, but it's just the reality of how things work with this process in a seller's market is that, the house is existing, everything's been fine so far, and you're kind of taking it, assuming that's going to remain the same. If the market totally shifts to where we're an extreme buyer's market and sellers are desperate to sell, then sure, you can get involved with this contingency more to make sure like, yeah, everything's, perfect in terms of, the permits and whatnot that you would want. So generally speaking, I would have a conversation with the buyer just around what I just discussed in terms of like, hey, this house has been here for 50 years already. We're not seeing any signs of the town condemning it or anything like that. I think it's safe to assume, everything's, kind of above board where it needs to be in regards to compliance. If they're a very picky buyer and, they want to know every little detail, rightfully so, frankly, then sure, this is what you would check to do that. So I'm going to leave it unchecked for now. Okay. Other contingencies, I'm probably going to do another training video around like all the other possible scenarios that could come up, but this is, where you would fill that in so that it's just, again, this is the meat and potatoes of the contract here. You want your other contingencies to be known right then and there. Okay. So moving on, attorney approval. It says if no less than 3 days and 3 if left blank. Don't leave it blank, even though that's there. Just fill in 3. There's no need for you to have a longer attorney approval contingency in the market that we're in. So just leave it at 3. But basically, real quick, concept is a contract is not a fully accepted contract until both buyer and seller attorneys approve of the contract. So as agents, we're not attorneys. So a lot of the intent of this clause is that everything is done properly contractually, but also it ends up being kind of the cold feet card for either party. So a buyer, is going to have the opportunity to get with their attorney to review things, but also just like be 100% on, what they're doing and what they're pursuing. Same with a seller, and more practical on the seller side. And this is how you explain to a buyer is like, hey, it's great that we have an accepted offer today. Especially when weekends are in play. If we don't have a seller attorney approval, like nothing, don't get excited as step one being done until we get the seller attorney approval. Because, a buyer could show up with a bag full of cash and, essentially the seller attorney can disapprove the contract that's already been signed, but just a simple disapproval. They don't have to have a reason why. And then this, your buyer's out. Again, they don't have to have a reason why to disapprove a contract. It happens, but generally speaking, hopefully both parties are moving in good faith to where it doesn't. What I'm going to do, I'm thinking out loud here. I'm going to remove the sale and transfer of title contingency. I'm going to do a separate training with like different, intricacies of, unique parts of a deal type of thing, just so this isn't too much of an overload, and go over the basics from now. So the rest of this attorney approval gets into the, what happens if either, there's the attorney approval isn't issued on time, or, explains what I just explained in terms of, either party's attorney can cancel in a timely manner. So next piece, condition of the property. First part refers to the property condition disclosure statement. If you hear PCD, property condition disclosure, that's what it's referring to. That's going to be something that's provided by a seller and attached in the listing documents, if the listing agent is doing their job properly. If there's an estate, you don't have to have a PCD. So if it's an estate sale, you would check this box, is not applicable. Otherwise, it's got to be if it's not an estate, it has to be one of these two items. Basically, the seller's provided it, which is most common, or, if it's not posted online and you get with the agent, hey, I want to write an offer and there's no PCD, they may tell you we're not providing it and go ahead and check this box, meaning we're not giving you one, and seller's going to credit the buyer $500 at closing in lieu of that, which kind of another topic for another day, but it does come up at some points. I'm just making some notes for the next class here. Okay, next section here. This HETPA concept is somewhat confusing, but basically we have to check one of these at all times. Okay, for owner occupant buyers, it's easy enough to where you're just going to check this box stating that the buyer is going to live in the property. Okay. If it's an investment property and they're not going to live in the property, then you would check this box stating that the seller acknowledges that there's no, foreclosure pending against the property. Okay. Certificate of occupancy, again, another thing that applies to unique situations typically, but again, back to the concept of, hey, this house has been here 50 years, should have a C of O, we should be good there. Then, you just fill in 0 here. If it's a rental property in city of Rochester, especially, and you need a certificate of occupancy to rent it, then you're going to want to do another set of circumstances, due diligence, to where you're looking in to see if they have it, or do we need it? Do we need to fill this in? And potentially add another contingency too. So I'll address that later, but owner occupant buyers are just using 0 here. Zoning code compliance, single family residence again for most cases. Okay, so depending on the property type, this is what you would fill in here. Condition of property, something that needs to be discussed. Here's where this as is term that's thrown out in real estate all the time comes into play. Property is as is, meaning that once the property closes, day one after a buyer buys it, they move in and the furnace breaks, it's as is. So it's on us as the buyers to make sure that we're okay with that as is condition leading up to the point where they cut a check to buy that property. So, that's why we do a final walkthrough. In the event there's not an inspection, like, yeah, you got a little more exposure to this point because you may not know what that as condition is. And you're kind of taking on more risk at that point, right? But, there's nothing needs to be checked here, but it's important to understand that clause. As gas, mineral oil, timber rights, very rarely is that a thing. You would, so you're just going to put, NA here. Services. So this is where we're seeing what kind of services this property has. And this was a unique example where this has electric, it has oil heat. So this is where we're doing fuel oil. Typically homes are on natural gas, which would be this box. So we're doing fuel oil here. It does not have public sewers, which most do. It does have public water, and it has a septic system instead of public sewers. So essentially you gotta have really 4 things addressed here. Never dealt with a house that doesn't have electricity. What's the heating source? So it could be electric. There could be no gas or no oil or propane, fuel heating source to the property. So that's a possibility. There may only be 3 boxes checked with that said. But generally it's what's the heating source? Is it natural gas or is it on oil or propane? And then is it public sewers or a septic system? And is it public water or well? So making sure that you have these filled in. These boxes apply to propane, which there isn't with this property, so we don't have to worry about. Final walkthrough. Buyer's going to do a final walkthrough, no more than 48 hours before closing. Make sure that the condition's the same as what it was when they bought it. Okay. Closing date. We're going to use Monroe County, depending on what county it's in. And 60-day closing period. 45 to 60 days is most common. So it's pretty easy to use this calendar feature here to where, okay, November is going to be, November 31st or 21st would be the first 30 days. And then December, 21st would be 60 days. If you want to do 45, you're 2 weeks earlier than that, approximately December 7th. We'll just do a 60-day closing. Possession of property. Generally speaking, you're going to check this box unless there's either what's called a post-possession or a pre-possession agreement, meaning that the seller is going to stay after closing, and that would be post-possession. So seller shall have the right to retain possession, and then these need to be filled in. Or, the buyer is taking possession before closing, and that would be item number 3 here. But let's just assume seller's moving out, buyer's moving in at closing. Okay. Number 7 here, title. Basically, attorneys are going to do their work to make sure that the property has clean title. Okay, is how all these sections read. And again, read them yourself so you have a good understanding of what that process is, and go from there. Brokers, that miscellaneous. This is stuff that needs to be filled in. I messed up, so usually we will have this filled in for you, but you're going to want to have Anthony and yourself as the person. The parties agree that Anthony Butera, Jason Mancuso of Keller Williams Realty GR bought about this purchase and sale. Or we wouldn't be involved with item number 2 here, but if you have this check, then that means that you're not a broker to the transaction or a realtor to the transaction. Generally speaking, I can wrap up the rest of this number 8 with just saying, hey, the rest of this is legalese type stuff, right? So attorney disclaimer, responsibility of persons under this contract, meaning whoever signing it understands what they're doing. Non-assignability means that you can assign the contract technically, which is a hot button topic right now in a way, and you can't find another buyer to close on it on your behalf. Notices, special notices, entire contract, miscellaneous, electronic signatures, etc. So just kind of standard legalese type stuff. So we're almost done. This part G here, the addenda, is very important. This is all the other addendums that are going to be attached to the contract to make it a complete contract. So you have to have these boxes checked technically in order for it to be part of the actual contract. So for example, if you didn't have, the well and septic checked here, then, an attorney could make an argument that that's not part of the contract. Therefore, you're not subject to a well inspection or a septic inspection in this case. Kind of a, a long shot type of example, but you just want to be diligent with what you're doing. So this house was older, built prior to 1978. It's going to need lead compliance. If you were an FHA buyer, you would need this. Personal property agreement we talked about. We're going to make it contingent on inspection. I'm not going to do the sale and transfer right now, but that's where that is. And a well and septic system addendum. And then the other thing, I'm going to have an escalation clause because that's pretty common still. So I'm going to write that in. It's not a box to check right now, even though probably should be. Another thing to write in here would be if you weren't making it contingent on an inspection, then you would want to have inspection waiver written in here. So that's a common thing that's added too. If there's, other addendums, you would just want to address it in that other section. And then this, number 9 here can be kind of another added contingency clause type of section. So if you either run out of space in that first one that I showed you here, other contingencies, or, some agents use this instead of the other contingencies. I like it in the first section because it's all right there and clean versus, sometimes, you read too fast and you miss this part. So, life of offer. So the offer expires technically when? Most want 24 hours to review, but it also would be highlighted in the private remarks of the listing, which, on our end, well, we don't have it here on now, but typically we have 24 hours. So, it's 11 a.m. right now. I'm going to assume it's going to take buyer a couple hours, and then maybe I have appointments this afternoon. I'm going to assume I get this submitted by 5. So I'm going to make it good till 5 o'clock tomorrow, October 22nd. We're good there. If they're declining the inspection, this box would be checked. Now you're onto the signature page. And then the admin page is where their info gets filled in. So, fill in their phone number, their email, the attorney info, we use Charles Santoli most commonly. You just fill in, don't leave stuff blank, okay? Fill it all in. And then this is where I messed up with yours will be formatted properly, but we have it set up so you don't have to add Anthony's info. If for some reason it's not working, you need to have Anthony C. Butera / your name, and then Anthony's public ID of 43934. It's also good if you add, and this is what we have pre-formatted for you, buteracontracts@gmail.com, so that our transaction coordinator can get everything sent to them and you don't have to constantly be forwarding things. That's the contract. That's the bulk of it. So we're going to run through an Authentisign, but right now you want to save it. Very important to save. So if you don't, you just did all this work and it's going to go away. And then to get back to the other forms, your transaction forms. Okay. So what else do we have? We have personal property agreement, which that's there. I'm going to look in this section, appliances, and if there's anything else that's included, and add those in. We want to use contract data today. With a finance deal, you want to add $1 here. And that shows the bank that all the appliances are not included in the purchase price and that the buyer is actually buying them for $1. This way, the bank is financing the home and not a bunch of other stuff in it. So refrigerator, stove, oven, dishwasher, microwave, washing machine. Okay, and then save that. From there, we're doing an inspection. So, you know, pre-templated form again. Explain to your buyer all the different inspections they can have if they're getting an inspection. Typically, most are just going to do this: is licensed engineer, licensed home inspector, registered architect, contractor, or other buyer representative. Essentially, you can have anybody you want, Uncle Joe, inspect the property with the way this reads. Okay. You know, a common thing is going to be radon, chimney too. You know, it just depends on the circumstances, but make sure your buyer knows the options that they have. So I'm just going to assume buyer says, I'm not worried about radon. I just want to get another look at the property, get a home inspector in there and go from there. You know, depending on the circumstance, you maybe want more aggressive than 7 days to get an inspection done. But, you know, depending on the market conditions and the situation with the house. From there, the next section to fill in is buyer's not satisfied with the inspection within, I'm going to say 2 days is standard. Meaning they have 2 days to review the reports after the inspection's done. And then they have the last spot, I'm just going to say another 2 days, to where if they're not, if after 2 days of review, a buyer presents to the seller, hey, I'm not happy, I want this and this done, or I want this credit as a result of the inspection, buyer and seller have 2 days to renegotiate, you know, within that time frame, you know, to get things done. Ultimately, a cancellation has to be signed in order to truly kill a deal, but this just sets reasonable time frames involved to get things done by. That's really what we need. Like, oh no, forgot about well and septic. Well and septic is done. So it says septic. So date, today's date. That's well, inspection of septic system and pumping of septic tank. You know, you can do this. This is, you know, we're relying on septic companies, so it's not as easy to get done in like 7 days. So generally, you know, 20 days or so, 30 days, probably no more than that, just so it's not lingering on forever. Let's just use 20 days to get an inspection done. In the old market, it was just always the seller's expense. I'm going to do this scenario where the buyer's paying for the septic inspection. They're going to have 20 days to get it done. Same thing with the property inspection, where, you know, I'm going to say, okay, we got 2 days to review the findings and then 2 days to renegotiate if anything's wrong after that. Now, if the test is performed at buyer's expense, the following paragraph shall apply, which it is. This blank here is essentially if they got to dig up the ground or whatever, if the yard isn't brought back to the condition it was in, then the buyer is going to deposit a reasonable amount, let's say $250, or maybe, you know, I'll say $500, to make sure that the buyer's tied to getting the, you know, the yard fixed or back into the same condition as much as possible within, you know, how many days? I'll say 7 days, kind of how that would play out. Okay. So that's that section. That's really the bulk of the contract. Oops, nope, sorry, keep forgetting the items. Now I'm going to do the escalation. So again, contract dated today. And again, notice because of the way I set it up, everything's pre-filled with the buyer's name, which makes it easy. Otherwise, if it's not, then you got to type it in each time. But, you know, the blanks to fill in here, the escalation clause is essentially if buyer's agreeing to pay X amount of dollars above the next highest offer up to a cap amount. Okay, so those, the 2 blanks we have to fill in are the escalating factor. What are you going to beat the next highest offer by? I'll just say $2,500. What's nice about this form is you fill it in here and then it writes it in here. And same thing here. We're at a list price of $159.9 is our initial offer. There's a competing offer. We'll beat the next highest offer by $2,500, and I'll just say up to a max amount of $200,000. So that fills in there, $200,000. This goes on to say that seller's got to provide the proof of a competing offer. And, also that's nice, it addresses this, that essentially other escalations can be used to, bump this offer up to a max amount of 200. From here, buyer's going to sign these two items that I'll show you. And then if the escalation is used, the seller agent would essentially fill in this blank with the final price, whether it got to 200 or if you ended up at, 190 or whatever. And then the buyer would sign again. So that's that. Other quick forms to go through. You need a fair housing discrimination form. And again, this will all be pre-filled in for you, but it's good to make sure. So you got to add Anthony's name to it. And this wasn't pre-filled for me because I ended up selecting the wrong item that I was talking about earlier. So we'll make sure that our operations team has everything set up for you and that everything's good to go with that. Agency form. This is needed no matter what. If it's a listing with another brokerage, you're just the buyer's agent, okay, which is already filled out. If it's a listing within Keller Williams, but not on our team, then you're a dual agent with designated sales agent. A general rule of thumb, you're never going to use this advanced informed consent of dual agency. What that means is, like, when you first met the buyer, you were telling them, hey, I just met you. I'm not representing you yet. You're essentially interested in this home that we're listing. Then you would be informing them in advance. Otherwise, if you have any relationship with the buyer you're working with, and it happens to be one of our listings or a listing within KW, it's not in advanced informed consent. Okay. So here, this listing's on our team, so we're actually just a straight dual agent. It's only straight dual agent when it's within the team. Okay. And that's what applies. So you just want to make sure the buyer's going to sign and the seller box is checked and they're going to sign too. If it were agent within the brokerage, dual agent with designated sales agent, and then you would fill in who is representing who in this section here. Okay. Straight dual. So that's pretty much all the forms that we need to fill out. So now what I like to do is go back to, where is it? The regular purchase contract and kind of make sure everything's the way I want it to. And once it is, then we get to Authenticide. So now we're in a spot where we're going to actually set up the sign. Okay. And first step is who's signing it. So you can go to add from transaction, and it already has the people in here. So you're going to sign it. Dennis and Lori are going to sign it. And you can add them all in there nice and cleanly. Then it brings it here. Next is the documents that you want to have included in it. And I like a certain order to this in terms of a presentation. So what I like to have first is their pre-qualification letter. So that's not something that's saved, in the transaction desk. So you got to go to your documents on your computer and find it. So that's there. From there, go back and keep adding. This My Transaction will pretty much have everything that you need to add. So you're just going to scroll down here and, it'll take time, but you need to know that you're going to need to have the fair housing form. You're going to need to know that you're going to have the agency form. You're going to need to know to have personal property agreement, property inspection in this case. It's not an HOA. We already have the regular contract. Not going to make it subject to the transfer and sale. And we do have the well. We do have an escalation. We're not waiving an inspection, but it's there for you. We need this franchise and affiliated business form that I'll show you. We need the PCD. We need the addendum from the listing agreement, which essentially sort of like a PCD additionally. And we need the lead addendum. We don't need to have, for our buyer contracts to turn in, we don't need to have the SOP. That's a listing thing. We don't need to have the delayed negotiations. That's a listing thing. But these pop up here because they're attached to the listing attachments. So everything that's in the listing attachments is, available in this section, just to make it nice and easy. We have everything that we need in order to get this signed now. So now kind of okay, this is good too. Make sure that your buyers are on here, because this will populate their signatures in wherever there's a templated form, meaning as long as it's not a PDF, it'll insert their signature where it needs to be, which is nice. So if you don't have Dennis here at buyer one, it's not going to be there. As soon as you put him there, he's gonna be in all the spots that you need to be in. So assigned signature blocks. All right. So here's the order I like to have. Pre-qual first. If there's an escalation, I would do that next. Because that way you're just, they're reading, okay, they're pre-qualified, what bank, good, Canandaigua, not bad. And then they'll see the escalation next. And then you get into the actual contract itself. And then I would do the important addendums, which would be your personal property agreement, your property inspection, and your well. And that, doesn't, or your septic, sorry, that doesn't really matter, what order they're in, those three. Okay. From there, I want the disclosures, more so the property disclosures first. So the PCD, I'll do the listing disclosure, and then I'll do the lead. And then from there is all the other kind of, for lack of a better word, obnoxious disclosures that we need in order to be compliant. So, I mean, this is intensive. There's 12 documents, 12 sets of documents that go into one offer. It's a lot of stuff, right? And this, there's more here because we have an inspection, but if we didn't have the inspection, we would have an inspection waiver. And, the one thing that's added here would be the septic. And, escalation too. If there wasn't an escalation, then we wouldn't have one. But so from here, now you go to your tools, and now you have, all the signers that you can toggle to, yourself included. And then you're, going to scroll down to the contract itself. So you see the pre-qual letter, and you make sure all this is correct, right? Make sure, okay, yep, they want to do escalation up to 200,000, beat the next highest offer by 2,500. We got signatures here. Again, they added them to them. And then if it's accepted, you're going to, the agent's going to fill in this spot, have the seller sign, and the buyer would sign here. Again, what's nice, this is newer. You can make changes to, these templated forms within Authentisign. It used to be that you'd have to essentially start over to make any changes to this. So if you catch any errors, you got the ability to revise it before you send it out. So you're just double checking everything again. Make sure it's the way you want it. $159,900 is the initial offer price, $10,000. We talked about the concessions. I'm going to remove that just because, it's, we're still in a market where it's not really a thing. And especially we're doing an escalation. We're trying to be competitive. So mortgage commitment, inspection is checked. They're not worried about permits. You're kind of going over your head right now, the terms that they gave you to offer on. You're checking that all of this is filled. You're checking the services are filled out properly. Closing date, good. You're scrolling through. And again, as you see, everything's pre-filled in for you. Good. Okay, they're not waiving their inspection, so that box is not checked. They've got the sign, the signing page is filled in, got all their attorney info, their info's on it. Anthony's name, Anthony's ID is on it, got Butera contracts on it. Again, that'll be pre-filled in for you. Inspection addendum, again, signatures are uploaded. Personal property agreement, signatures are uploaded. Septic, signatures are uploaded. Now, this is where the signatures stop uploading to a degree. This is a PCD. So, make sure your clients read this, or make sure that you read it, I should say, first, to know, okay, let's see if they're disclosing anything, right? So, I'm flying through this, but, read it thoroughly. Right now, all no's, which is good. Lead plumbing present, unknown. Older house, they don't know. Do they truly not just know? Are they hiding something? Probably not, but these are the conversations that you have to have as an agent. No, roof, shingles, how is the roof? Unknown. Okay, that's something to discuss with your clients. Hey, we don't know what the roof age is. Let's make sure we take a hard look at it. Water quality been tested, unknown, no big deal. Septic, it's unknown age. It was last pumped in September. It's pumped every 3 years, not bad. Electric service, be important in this case. They're, they understand they're on National Grid and not RG&E. But no big deal. No, good. And then, this is asking, is there anything wrong with all this? And they're saying no to everything, which is good. School district, this section here, if anything's filled in, it's an opportunity for a seller to kind of explain things further if needed. But, again, this is where things stop getting filled in. So now you got to go to over here and take your tools. You got Dennis in there. I'm going to go with Lori, add it that way. And now the buyer signs that. Buyer doesn't have to sign this addendum. But again, this just goes over, more kind of PCD related questions. I'm looking through this, nothing looks alarming so far. It addresses the heating oil. Okay, so in here, there's not a written contract to provide heating oil, so that's important. No solar panels, unknown if they've done a radon test. Okay, so this is interesting. There's code violations on this property. You as an agent want to look into this to make sure you know what those code violations are before you, get into, having your buyer read it and be like, what are the code violations? What are they talking about? In the event the buyer actually reads the contract, you want to be educated on it before you just throw something at them. And again, gets into ages of utilities and stuff like that. Buyer does not have to sign this. Okay. Lead addendum, the buyer does have to sign. First, you have to add their names. So this full name section allows it to be done easy. They're not disclosing anything. Now, a buyer needs to initial. What I like to do is kind of go through each buyer section and then switch the buyer. So there's initial there, initial here, initial here. Added one, initial down here, and one here. Only one buyer needs to check what they're doing. And for a lead, you're always going to waive it. And then they sign. And you see how I'm moving the dates around just into the date section. Lori, all her initials. And then you're going to sign this as well. And that's that. It's a lot of signatures that you got to keep track of. So this is, you might want to watch this a couple times to really get into the groove of it. But, obviously we're here to help with real-time stuff too. Dual agency form in this case, fair housing form. So this was a one of the templated forms. So it's filled in for you. The signatures, that is. Now we get to the last form, which is a franchise form. So you need to sign this as the agent down here. Your buyers need to each initial off whether they want a home warranty, and one of them needs to check yes or no. And it's important to know, generally speaking, you just waive it. If they want to get a home warranty after the fact, they can. But that's for that section. Buyer signs. We need to have, for compliance, the address of the property they're buying And either one of them, just be in the habit of filling out both their phone number and their email. So how you add things to here would be through this text box section here. Okay. And what's going on? Just click on it and then you can enter text. I'm just going quick, but do the full address, but 30 Swamp Road. Okay. Tools, another text box, phone number, 5555. Another text box for their email, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. And then the last form, we're almost done. How about that? We need full names. We need a date. We need them to sign. Again, move the date over to each section. Do it for the other buyer too. The other thing that we need here is just the address they're buying. So again, 30 Swamp Road. That's it. Well, that was a lot, but from here, you would just double check, go through, make sure you didn't miss any spots. I'm flying through it, but you know, you got the ability before you send a sign, which is right here. I'm not going to push next because this would go to my clients. They don't know it's coming. But actually, you know what I can do? I'm going to change to my email. I don't want to mess this up. So I'm not going to send this to sign, but you would just hit next. Another screen would pop up. Essentially, are you sure you want to send it to sign? And then it goes out to sign. Once both parties sign and yourself, so 3 signatures get completed, then you know it will kick back to your email with a complete signing, and then you've got a contract to email or an offer to email to the seller's agent. This was a long video. This was a lot that we covered. I'm going to wrap it up here, and then I'll do another one with kind of more fine details and things of that nature. So thanks for tuning in. Please contact us anytime with any questions. All righty.